Knox Merritt wiped grease from his hands with a worn shop rag, the smell of two-stroke oil thick in the morning air of his garage. Fairbridge, Oregon stretched out beyond the open bay doors of town where loggers and mechanics made honest livings and people knew their neighbors. He'd lived here his whole life, worked these mountains as a smoke jumper until his back gave out, then settled into fixing chainsaws and generators. Simple work. Good work. Knox, are you listening to me? Lorna's voice cut through his thoughts like a rusty blade. He turned to face his wife of 17 years. She stood in the doorway between the garage and their house, already dressed for whatever social event she'd planned. Her makeup was perfect, her clothes expensive, too expensive for a mechanic's salary, but she'd stopped caring about that years ago. I'm listening. Mother wants to take Willa hiking today. Eagle Ridge Trail. Lorna checked her phone, not meeting his eyes. Girl time, you know. Knox set down the carburetor he'd been cleaning. Eagle Ridge was a decent trail, nothing too challenging, but it wound through some rough terrain. Willa mentioned wanting to finish her art project today. She can do that tomorrow. Maureen Stilton appeared behind Lorna, her silver hair pulled back tight enough to stretch her permanently disapproving expression. The child spends too much time indoors with those paints and pencils. Knox had learned long ago that arguing with his mother-in-law was like trying to reason with a forest fire. Maureen had never forgiven him for taking her daughter away from the city life she'd planned for Lorna. Every visit was a reminder that he wasn't good enough, would never be good enough. What does Willa want to do? He asked. Lorna shrugged. She'll be fine. Fresh air will do her good. Through the kitchen window, Knox could see his 15-year-old daughter at the dining table, bent over a canvas with the focused intensity she brought to everything that mattered to her. Willa had her mother's dark hair, but Knox's steady brown eyes and quiet nature. She was smart, thoughtful, and artistic in ways that sometimes amazed him. Willa, Knox called. Come here a minute. His daughter appeared in the doorway, paint smudged on her fingers. Yeah, Dad. Your mom and grandmother want to take you hiking. Eagle Ridge. Willa glanced between the three adults, reading the tension like she always did. I was hoping to finish my project today. It's due Monday. You have all weekend, Maureen said, her voice sharp. Too much time alone isn't healthy for a girl your age. You need to get out, socialize. I'll be hiking with you and Mom. That's not exactly socializing. Knox caught the slight smile that flickered across his daughter's face. She was too polite to argue directly, but she had her own quiet way of making her point. It's settled, Lorna said, already turning away. We leave in an hour. We're good shoes. After they left, Knox stood in his garage and tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. Lorna had been distant for months, maybe longer. She spent more time on her phone, more nights out with friends he'd never met, more money on clothes and trips she never invited him to join. When he tried to talk about it, she'd accused him of being paranoid and controlling. Maybe he was paranoid. Maybe 17 years of marriage and the slow grind of disappointment had made him see problems where none existed. Lorna had married a smoke jumper who'd seemed adventurous and brave. Instead, she'd gotten a small-town mechanic with calloused hands and modest dreams. But Willa was different. Willa was everything good about both of them, everything worth protecting. And something about sending her up that mountain with two women who seemed more interested in their phones than their surroundings didn't sit right. Knox picked up his cell phone and scrolled to Willa's number. He started to type a message, then stopped. She was 15, not 5. Lorna was her mother. Maureen, for all her sharp edges, wouldn't let anything happen to her granddaughter. He put the phone away and got back to work. The Eagle Ridge Trail wound through dense Douglas fir and madrona, climbing steadily toward the ridgeline. Willa followed her mother and grandmother up the narrow path, her backpack bouncing with each step. The morning air was crisp and clean, touched with the smell of pine and damp earth. How much further? Lorna asked, checking her phone for the third time in 10 minutes. Another mile to the viewpoint, Maureen replied. She moved with the determined stride of someone who refused to acknowledge her 62 years. When I was your age, Lorna, we hiked 10 miles without complaining. Willa tuned out their conversation and focused on the forest around her. Light filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and somewhere ahead she could hear the sound of running water. This would make a good painting the interplay of light and shadow, the way the trees seemed to lean in toward the trail like they were sharing secrets. Watch where you're going, Maureen called back. You're daydreaming again. The trail narrowed as it switchbacked up a steep section, loose rock and exposed roots making the footing treacherous. Willa placed each step carefully, using her hands to steady herself against the hillside. Above her, Lorna was breathing hard, her face flushed despite the cool air. "This is ridiculous," Lorna muttered. "I don't know why we couldn't just drive up to Lookout Point." "Because that's not hiking," Maureen said. "That's just parking and taking selfies." They crested a small rise, and the trail opened onto a narrow ridge. To the right, the ground dropped away sharply into a ravine thick with blackberry vines and fallen logs. To the left, a steep slope covered in loose talus led up toward the peak. The trail itself was maybe 3 feet wide, carved into the hillside by decades of boots and erosion. Willa stepped carefully around a section where the outside edge had crumbled away, leaving a gap that would be easy to catch a foot in. She was watching the ground, focused on not twisting an ankle, when she heard her phone buzz with a text. "Who's that?" Maureen asked, looking back. "Just Dad, checking in." Willa glanced at the message, "Have fun, be safe, love you," and smiled. Her father worried about everything, but in a good way. A way that made her feel protected instead of suffocated. She was putting the phone back in her pocket when her foot caught on something, a root, a rock. She never saw what. Her ankle twisted hard to the left, and she pitched forward, her hands coming up to break or fall. But there was nothing to catch her. The trail edge crumbled under her weight, and she tumbled sideways into the gap, her left leg twisting behind her as she fell. The crack was loud and sharp, like a branch breaking. Willa hit the rocky ground hard, her leg bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Pain shot up from her shin in white-hot waves that made her vision blur. "Oh!" she gasped, then screamed as she tried to move. "Oh God, something's wrong." Lorna scrambled down the loose rock, her designer hiking boots slipping on the stones. "Willa, what happened?" "My leg." Willa was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her left shin. It was bent wrong, definitely bent wrong, and when she tried to straighten it, the pain made her dizzy. "I think it's broken." "Don't be dramatic," Maureen called from the trail above. "You probably just twisted it." Lorna knelt beside her daughter, her face pale. She reached for Willa's leg, then pulled her hand back. "It's probably just a sprain. You're young. You heal fast." "Mom, look at it." Willa tried to keep her voice steady, but panic was rising in her chest. The pain was getting worse, not better, and her leg felt hot and swollen inside her boot. "It's not right." Lorna pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. No signal. Of course there was no signal. They were in the middle of nowhere on a mountain trail. "We need to get you back to the car." "I can't walk." Willa tried to shift position and cried out again. "I can't put weight on it." "You're going to have to try," Maureen said, making her way down from the trail. She looked at Willa's leg with the expression she used for broken appliances, annoyed and impatient. "If you can cry, you can walk." "Grandmother, I really think." "I don't want to hear it." Maureen's voice was sharp. "I've raised 4 children and survived worse than this. You're just shaken up." Lorna checked her phone again, held it up toward the sky like that might help. "We can't call anyone from here anyway. The parking lot is only 2 miles back." "Mom, please." Willa was begging now, something she'd never done in her life. The pain was so bad she couldn't think straight, couldn't form arguments or explanations. "Something's really wrong." "Nothing is wrong except your attitude," Maureen said. She grabbed Willa under the arms and hauled her to her feet. The movement sent lightning through Willa's leg, and she screamed, her vision going black around the edges. "Put your arm around my shoulder," Lorna said. "We'll help you." The walk back down the mountain was the longest 2 hours of Willa's life. Every step was agony. Every root and rock on the trail, a fresh torture. She tried to hop on her right foot, tried to keep weight off her left leg, but the uneven ground made it impossible. By the time they reached the parking lot, she was sobbing and barely conscious. Maureen drove, her jaw set in a hard line. Lorna sat in the passenger seat, checking her phone now that they had signal again, but not making any calls. We should go to the hospital, Willow whispered from the back seat. Hospitals are for emergencies, Maureen said. This is just a sprain. Ice and rest, that's all you need. Willa closed her eyes and thought about her father. He would know what to do. He always knew what to do. Knox was cleaning his tools when he heard the car in the driveway. Too early, he thought, glancing at the clock. They'd only been gone 4 hours, nowhere near enough time for a proper hike and lunch at the summit. He stepped out of the garage and watched Lorna's SUV park crooked in the driveway. Maureen got out first, her face set in familiar lines of irritation. Lorna emerged from the passenger side, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. But when the back door opened and Willa tried to stand, Knox's world tilted sideways. His daughter's face was gray with pain, her left leg barely touching the ground. She tried to take a step and nearly collapsed, catching herself against the car with a gasp that cut through him like a blade. Knox was moving before he realized it, covering the distance between them in 3 quick strides. What happened? She fell on the trail, Lorna said, not looking up from her phone. Twisted her ankle. She's being dramatic about it. Knox knelt beside his daughter, his hands gentle as he examined her leg. Even through her hiking pants, he could see the swelling. Her boot was tight against skin that had expanded beyond its normal size. What does it hurt? He asked quietly. My shin. Willa's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, I think it's broken. Knox looked up at his wife. How long ago did this happen? A couple hours, Lorna said. We helped her walk back down. She did fine. You made her walk on this. Knox's voice was still calm, but something cold was spreading through his chest. He looked at Maureen, who was standing by the front door like she wanted to escape. You made her walk 2 miles on a broken leg? It's not broken, Maureen said. Children exaggerate. A little pain never killed anyone. Knox lifted Willa as gently as he could, carrying her toward his truck. She weighed nothing, felt fragile as bird bones in his arms. We're going to the hospital. Knox, really, Lorna said. Don't you think you're overreacting? It's probably just, get in the truck or don't, Knox said, not looking back. But we're going. Now. The drive to Fairbridge General took 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours. Knox kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Willa, who was lying across the back seat with her leg elevated on a pillow. She wasn't crying anymore, but her silence was worse than tears. Lorna sat in the passenger seat, making small talk about nothing, the weather, a sale at her favorite store, what they should have for dinner. Knox wondered if she was in shock or if she just didn't understand what had happened, or if she understood perfectly and didn't care. The emergency room was quiet for a Saturday afternoon. Knox carried Willa through the automatic doors while Lorna parked the truck, and within minutes they had her in a wheelchair, then on examination table. Dr. Martinez was young, competent, and kind. She asked Willa to describe what had happened, how the injury occurred, what the pain felt like now. She examined the leg carefully, her face growing more serious as she worked. We'll need x-rays, she said finally. But based on the swelling and the mechanism of injury, I'm concerned about a possible fracture. Knox held his daughter's hand while they waited for the films to develop. Willa's skin was cold and clammy, her pulse too fast. Shocked, the nurse had said. Perfectly normal response to trauma and pain. When Dr. Martinez returned with the x-rays, her expression told Knox everything he needed to know before she spoke. It's a displaced fracture of the tibia, she said, clipping the films to a light board. You can see here where the bone has shifted out of alignment. This is going to require surgical intervention to repair properly. Knox stared at the ghostly image of his daughter's broken leg. The bone was cracked clean through, the pieces separated by what looked like inches. The concerning thing, Dr. Martinez continued, is that walking on this type of fracture can cause additional damage. The displacement we're seeing suggests significant force or repeated stress on the break. What does that mean? Knox asked. It means that if this had been treated immediately immobilized and kept non-weight bearing, we might have been looking at a simple reduction and casting. Now, we're looking at surgery, pins, possibly a longer healing time. Knox felt something break inside his chest, something that would never heal properly. She walked 2 miles on this. They made her walk 2 miles. Dr. Martinez looked from Knox to Lorna, who was standing in the corner, checking her phone. I see. Well, we'll need to admit her for surgery tomorrow morning. The orthopedic surgeon will want to review the films and discuss the procedure with you. That night, Knox sat beside his daughter's hospital bed and watched her sleep. The pain medication had finally kicked in, but even in sleep her face was tense, her breathing shallow. Every few minutes she would shift and wince, her body trying to find a position that didn't hurt. Lorna had gone home to get some things and hadn't returned. Maureen had left for her hotel without visiting the hospital at all. Knox thought about the hike, about the decisions that had been made on that mountain. His wife and her mother had looked at his daughter's broken leg and decided it wasn't worth their time or inconvenience. They had made her walk, made her suffer, because acknowledging the severity of her injury would have required them to act like adults. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Rick Clemens, a lawyer he'd done some work for a few years back. Rick handled family law, among other things. Knox had never thought he'd need that particular service, but he didn't call that night. But he saved the number to his favorites, and when Willa stirred and reached for his hand, he held on tight and made her a promise she couldn't hear. No one would ever hurt her like this again. Knox waited until Willa was asleep before he asked the questions that had been burning in his chest all day. He kept his voice quiet, casual, like they were discussing her homework instead of something that would change everything. Can you tell me exactly what happened on the trail? Willa shifted against her pillows, her leg immobilized in a temporary splint until surgery. I tripped, caught my foot on something, and fell into this gap where the trail had washed out. And then I knew something was wrong right away. The way it felt, the way it looked. She was quiet for a moment, staring at the ceiling. I asked Mom to call for help, but she said there was no signal. Knox nodded. He'd hiked that trail dozens of times. Cell coverage was spotty in the mountains, but there were usually pockets of signal, especially on the ridges. Did they try to call when you got back to the parking lot? Willa looked at him with those steady brown eyes that saw too much. No. Mom got signal back and checked her messages, but she didn't call anyone. Grandmother said hospitals were for emergencies. Knox felt his jaw clench. What else did they say? Grandmother said if I could cry, I could walk. She said I was being dramatic. Willa's voice was small now, younger than her 15 years. Mom kept checking her phone. Even when I was crying, she kept checking her phone. Knox reached for his daughter's hand. Her fingers were cold, still slightly trembling from shock and pain medication. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Dad. But it was in a way that Knox was just beginning to understand. He'd known Lorna was changing, becoming someone harder and more selfish with each passing year. He'd seen how she looked at their life like it was a prison sentence, how she talked about their friends like they were beneath her. But he'd thought, somehow, that Willa would always be safe from that contempt. He'd been wrong. That night, after Willa fell asleep, Knox drove home to an empty house. Lorna's car wasn't in the driveway, and a note on the kitchen counter said she'd gone to comfort her mother, who was upset about the accident. Knox stood in his kitchen and felt the last piece of his marriage crumble to dust. He made coffee and sat down at Lorna's laptop. She'd never been careful about passwords, used the same one for everything, their wedding date followed by her birth year. Sentimental, she'd called it when he'd suggested she change it. Now he was grateful for her carelessness. Knox wasn't a tech expert, but 17 years of living with someone taught you their habits. Lorna backed up everything to the cloud, saved every photo and document like she was building a digital monument to her life. He found what he was looking for in her email. The first message from Declan Holt was dated 3 months ago. Casual, professional, something about a real estate listing. But by the second exchange, the tone had shifted. Warmer, more personal. Had such a good time at coffee yesterday. You're easy to talk to. Thanks for listening. Knox doesn't really understand the things I care about. I can't wait to see you again. Knox scrolled through months of messages, watching his marriage dissolve in real time. Lunch dates that weren't mentioned at home. Afternoon errands that lasted for hours. Complaints about their life, their house, their marriage that grew sharper and more bitter with each exchange. The worst ones were about Willa, that she's so much like her father. Quiet, boring. I worry she'll never amount to anything. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't gotten pregnant so young. Knox printed everything. Every email, every text message that had synced to her laptop. The timestamps told a story that would matter in court if it came to that. And after today, Knox was beginning to think it would. He found photos too. Selfies from restaurants he'd never heard of, pictures of hotel rooms, images that made it clear Lorna's relationship with Declan Holt had moved far beyond friendly conversation. The Airbnb receipts were in her browser history. Weekend getaways while Knox thought she was visiting friends. Romantic retreats funded by money from their joint account money that should have been going toward Willa's college fund or the mortgage on their house. Knox printed those too. By the time he was done, he had a stack of documents 3 inches thick. Evidence of infidelity, financial deception, and emotional abandonment. But what mattered most wasn't what Lorna had done to him. What mattered was what she'd done to Willa. What she'd keep doing if he let her. Rick Clemens looked like a lawyer, expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of handshake that closed deals and ended marriages. His office overlooked downtown Fairbridge from the 3rd floor of the old bank building, and through the windows Knox could see the mountains where his daughter had been hurt. "I've reviewed the medical records you provided," Rick said, setting the hospital file aside. Dr. Martinez was very thorough in documenting the extent of the injury and the contributing factors. Knox nodded. The surgery had gone well, but Willa would be in a cast for 8 weeks, then physical therapy for months after that. The orthopedic surgeon had been clear about the long-term implications. This was the kind of injury that could cause problems for years. "The question is what you want to accomplish here," Rick continued. "If you're looking for full custody, we need to build a case that demonstrates a pattern of neglect or endangerment. She made our daughter walk 2 miles on a broken leg," Knox said. "How much more pattern do you need? It's a compelling incident, but family court judges have seen it all. They're looking for documented patterns, corroborating evidence, professional assessments." Rick leaned forward. "The good news is that you've got a strong foundation. The medical records are damning, especially Dr. Martinez's notes about the additional damage caused by walking on the fracture." Knox had read those notes so many times he'd memorized them. Displacement consistent with continued weight-bearing after initial fracture. Recommend immediate orthopedic consultation for surgical repair. What else do we need? A psychological evaluation would help. Someone who can assess Willa's emotional state. Document any trauma from the incident. There are also practical considerations: who's been the primary caregiver, who handles school issues, medical appointments, that sort of thing. Knox thought about the last 5 years of Willa's life. He'd been the one who took her to doctor's appointments, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences. Lorna had been physically present but emotionally absent, more interested in her phone than her daughter's achievements or struggles. "I can document all of that," he said. "Good. The other element we need to consider is your wife's fitness as a parent. The infidelity alone won't be enough. Courts don't much care about extramarital affairs unless they directly impact the child. But if we can show a pattern of prioritizing her own interests over Willa's welfare." Knox slid the stack of printed emails across the desk. "She's been having an affair for months. Spending money on hotels and trips while Willa needs new clothes for school. She complains about our daughter to her boyfriend, calls her boring and unambitious." Rick flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious as he read. "This is good. Very good. How did you obtain these?" "Her laptop. She gave me the password years ago, never changed it. Technically legal since it's a shared household device, and you had permission to access it," Rick said. "Though we'll want to be careful about how we present this in court. The content is more important than the method." They spent the next hour going through the evidence, building a timeline of Lorna's neglect and emotional withdrawal. Rick took notes in precise handwriting, asking questions that Knox hadn't thought to consider. "Has your wife ever made disparaging comments about Willa in front of the child?" Knox thought about family dinners where Lorna had criticized Willa's grades, her friends, her interests. Small cruelties that had seemed like normal parental frustration at the time, but looked different in this context. "Yes, regularly." "Has she missed important events, school plays, art shows, sports?" "She's missed most of them. Always has something else to do." "And on the day of the hiking incident, whose idea was it to take Willa along?" Knox paused. That was a detail he hadn't focused on before. Her mother's. Maureen insisted Willa come, even though Willa wanted to stay home and finish a school project. Rick made another note. So the grandmother pressured the child to participate in an activity she didn't want to do, then minimized her injury when she was hurt. That's a pattern of poor judgment that extends beyond your wife. By the time they finished, Knox had a clear understanding of what came next. Rick would file for emergency custody based on the medical evidence, then build the case for permanent custody over the following weeks. It would be expensive, emotionally draining, and there were no guarantees. But when Knox thought about Willa lying in that hospital bed, about the trust in her eyes when she'd reached for his hand, he knew there was no choice. One more thing, Rick said as Knox stood to leave. You'll want to be very careful about your interactions with your wife going forward. Don't give her any ammunition to use against you, no angry confrontations, no threats, nothing that could be construed as intimidating behavior. Knox shook the lawyer's hand. I won't need to threaten her. The facts will speak for themselves. That afternoon, Knox drove to the office of Dr. Janet Walsh, a child psychologist Rick had recommended. Dr. Walsh was older, grandmotherly, with the kind of calm presence that probably made even traumatized children feel safe. I'd like Willa to tell her story in her own words, Dr. Walsh explained. No leading questions, no pressure to say what she thinks you want to hear. Just the facts as she remembers them. Knox waited in the outer office while his daughter spoke to a stranger about the worst day of her life. Through the closed door, he could hear the low murmur of voices, but not the words. Willa's voice was steady, controlled. She was her father's daughter in that way, never one to dramatize or exaggerate. When they emerged an hour later, Dr. Walsh's expression was carefully neutral, but Knox caught something in her eyes that looked like anger. We'll have a written report ready by the end of the week, she said. But I can tell you now that Willa is a remarkably resilient young woman. She's processing this experience with a maturity that's both impressive and heartbreaking. Knox helped his daughter back to the truck, watching her navigate the crutches with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else. She didn't ask what would happen next, didn't demand explanations or promises. She trusted him to handle it. That trust was the most precious thing in Knox's world, and he would not let anyone break it again. Lorna announced her plans over breakfast, speaking to her phone instead of looking at Knox or Willa. I'm going to visit my cousin in Eugene this weekend. Girls' trip. I need some time to decompress after everything that's happened. Knox poured coffee and kept his expression neutral. When are you leaving? Thursday morning. Back Sunday night. She finally looked up, her eyes sliding past Willa's cast to meet his. You'll be fine, right? I know you're good at the domestic stuff. Willa made a small sound that might have been amusement or disgust. Knox reached over and squeezed her shoulder. We'll manage, he said. After Lorna left for her morning yoga class, Knox sat down with his daughter at the kitchen table. The morning light slanted through the windows, illuminating the art supplies scattered across the surface. Willa had been working on a new piece, a landscape of the mountains visible from their backyard, all earth tones and gentle shadows. I need to tell you something, Knox said. Some things are going to change around here. Willa set down her brush and looked at him with those steady eyes that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her mother 17 years ago. You're getting divorced. It wasn't a question. Knox shouldn't have been surprised Willa saw everything, understood more than most adults gave her credit for. Yes, and I'm going to ask for full custody. Willa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently turning the brush between her hands. Because of what happened on the mountain, that's part of it, but not all of it. Knox had thought carefully about how much to tell her. She was 15, old enough to understand complex situations, but young enough to be damaged by too much adult information. He decided on truth, but not all of it. Your mother and I have been growing apart for a long time. She wants a different kind of life than this, and that's her choice. But you're my priority. You always have been. What about Mom? Will I still see her? Knox felt the familiar tightness in his chest. This was the hardest part, not turning his daughter against her mother, even though Lorna had earned every harsh word he could speak. That will be up to the court to decide. But whatever happens, I'll make sure you're safe and taken care of. Willa nodded, her attention returning to her painting. Good. That afternoon, Knox walked through their house like he was seeing it for the first time. 17 years of marriage, 15 years of raising a child. And what did he have to show for it? A modest home in a small town, a successful but unglamorous business, a daughter who was everything good about his life. Lorna saw it all as failure. Knox was beginning to understand it was actually victory that he spent Thursday morning at the bank, setting up a trust fund in Willa's name. The money came from his business account profits from 15 years of fixing chainsaws and generators. Money he'd saved for his daughter's future. It was completely legal, completely his right, and completely out of Lorna's reach. The locksmith came Thursday afternoon while Willa was at school. Knox had agonized over this decision, but Rick had been clear if Lorna was planning to fight for custody, he needed to control access to his home and his daughter. Just the exterior doors? The locksmith asked. All of them. Front, back, garage, everything. Knox kept one set of keys for himself, gave another to Willa, and put the third set in his truck's glove compartment. When Lorna came home Sunday night, she'd find herself locked out of the house she'd never really wanted anyway. Friday morning brought a visit from Deputy Marshall, a young woman Knox had known since she was in high school. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen enough domestic situations to know when things were about to get complicated. "I've got papers to serve," she said, holding up a manila envelope. "Emergency custody petition, restraining order request, and divorce papers. Your lawyer says the respondent should be back Sunday night." Knox nodded. Rick had timed everything perfectly. Lorna would return from her romantic weekend to find her world permanently altered. No time to prepare, no opportunity to hide assets or coach witnesses. "She's not going to take this well," Knox said. "They usually don't. You want to make sure your daughter isn't here when I serve the papers. Things can get emotional." Knox had already arranged for Willa to spend Sunday night with her friend Emma. A sleepover, perfectly normal for a 15-year-old girl. Emma's parents were good people who'd known Willa since elementary school. They'd keep her safe while her world changed around her. Saturday afternoon, Knox stood in his garage and looked at the life he'd built. Tools organized on pegboards, workbenches worn smooth by years of use. The familiar smell of oil and sawdust that meant home and honest work. In a few days, this might be all he had left. But it would be enough as long as he had his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from Lorna. "Having an amazing time. Eugene is so much more sophisticated than Fairbridge. Wish I could stay longer." Knox deleted the message without responding. He had his own wish that his wife would stay in Eugene permanently and leave his daughter alone. But he knew that was too much to hope for. Sunday night, Knox sat at his kitchen table and waited. Through the window, he could see the driveway where Lorna would park, the front door she'd try to unlock with keys that no longer worked. In a few hours, everything would be in motion. No going back, no second chances, no room for forgiveness. That he thought about the man he'd been 20 years ago, younger, more optimistic, still believing that love could overcome any obstacle. That man would have fought for his marriage, would have tried counseling and compromise and all the tools that people use to rebuild broken relationships. But that man had never watched his daughter cry from pain while the people who were supposed to protect her checked their phones and complained about inconvenience. Knox wasn't that man anymore. And he was grateful for the change. Knox heard the car in the driveway at 9:47 p.m. He'd been sitting at his kitchen table for 2 hours, drinking coffee that had gone cold and watching the clock like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Through the window, he saw Lorna's SUV park at its usual crooked angle, saw her gather bags from the back seat with the unhurried movements of someone who thought she was coming home. He stayed seated when she tried the front door. Stayed seated when the key didn't work, when she tried it again with more force. The sound of her footsteps circling to the back door, the rattle of another useless key, the sharp knock that followed. "Knox. Knox, what's wrong with the locks?" Knox walked to the back door, but didn't open it. Through the glass, he could see his wife's face, confused, irritated, but not yet afraid. She looked tanned and relaxed, her hair shorter than when she'd left, styled in a way that probably cost more than his truck payment. "The locks have been changed," he said through the door. "What? Why?" Lorna's voice rose with the first edge of panic. "Knox, open the door. I live here." "Not anymore." Knox walked back to the kitchen table and sat down. He could hear Lorna moving around the house, trying windows, rattling door handles. Her voice came through the walls, growing shriller with each failed attempt at entry. "This is ridiculous. You can't lock me out of my own house." Knox checked his watch. 10:15 p.m. Deputy Marshal would arrive in 45 minutes with the papers that would make everything official. Until then, he just had to wait. His phone rang. "Lorna, answer me. What is this about?" Knox hung up without speaking. The phone rang again immediately. He turned it off at exactly 11 p.m. Headlights swept across the driveway. Knox watched through the front window as Deputy Marshal's patrol car parked behind Lorna's SUV, effectively trapping it in place. The deputy got out slowly, one hand resting on her radio, the other holding the manila envelope that would change everything. Lorna rushed toward the patrol car, her relief visible even in the darkness. "Thank God you're here. My husband has lost his mind. He's locked me out of my own house." Deputy Marshal's voice was calm, professional. "Mrs. Merritt, I'm Deputy Marshal with the County Sheriff's Office. I have some papers to serve." Knox opened the front door and stepped onto his porch. The night air was cool, touched with the smell of rain that might come before morning. In the distance, he could hear the whistle of a freight train heading east through the mountains, carrying its cargo towards sunrise and destinations unknown. "What papers?" Lorna looked between Knox and the deputy, her face pale in the porch light. "What's going on?" Deputy Marshal opened the envelope and pulled out 3 separate documents. "You're being served with an emergency custody petition, a restraining order request, and divorce papers. You have the right to legal representation and the obligation to appear in court as specified in these documents." Lorna stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "Custody? Restraining order? Knox, what is this?" Knox stepped off the porch, close enough to see his wife's face clearly, but careful to keep his distance. Deputy Marshal had warned him about appearances, about giving Lorna anything she could use to claim intimidation or threatening behavior. "It's what happens when you make our daughter walk 2 miles on a broken leg," Knox said quietly. "That was an accident. She fell. It wasn't my fault. You had a choice when she fell. You chose your convenience over her welfare." Lorna's voice cracked with the first real emotion Knox had heard from her in months. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Knox. You can't destroy a family over one mistake." Knox looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in years. She was still beautiful, still the woman who'd turned his head at a county fair when they were both young and full of dreams. But somewhere along the way, she'd become someone else. Someone who could look at their daughter's pain and see only inconvenience. "It wasn't one mistake," he said. "It was 17 years of mistakes. I just finally stopped pretending they didn't matter." Deputy Marshal cleared her throat. "Mrs. Merritt, do you have somewhere to stay tonight? You cannot return to this residence until the restraining order hearing." Lorna looked from the deputy to Knox to the house that had been her home for 15 years. "This is insane. You can't just throw me out like garbage." "You're not garbage," Knox said. "You're just not welcome here anymore." A second car turned into the driveway Maureen's silver sedan, moving fast enough to suggest panic. Knox's mother-in-law burst from the driver's seat like a woman half her age, her face twisted with outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" Maureen demanded, striding toward the group. "Deputy, I want this man arrested for harassment." Deputy Marshal stepped between Maureen and Knox, her hand moving instinctively toward a radio. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and stay back. This is my daughter's house. He has no right to lock her out. Actually, ma'am, Mr. Merritt has every right to secure his property. These are legal documents, served through the proper channels." Maureen's eyes found Knox over the deputy's shoulder. "You did this because of the hiking trip. You're blaming us for an accident that wasn't our fault." "I'm protecting my daughter from people who think her broken leg is an inconvenience," Knox replied. "She's 15 years old. She fell down and got hurt. Children do that all the time." Knox felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Children fall down. Adults don't make them walk on broken bones for 2 hours while they check their phones. We did what we thought was best. "No." Knox's voice cut through the night air like a blade. "You did what was easiest for you. There's a difference." Deputy Marshal handed Lorna the papers, her voice returning to official business. Mrs. Merritt, you have 48 hours to secure legal representation. The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. in Judge Rodriguez's courtroom. Lorna clutched the papers against her chest like a shield. Knox, please. We can work this out. We don't need lawyers and courts. We needed you to care about our daughter's welfare, Knox said. That ship has sailed. Maureen grabbed her daughter's arm. Come on. We'll go to my hotel. In the morning, we'll call the best lawyer in Portland and fight this ridiculous accusation. As they walked toward Maureen's car, Lorna turned back one last time. In the porch light, Knox could see tears on her face, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her since Willa's injury. I love her too, Lorna said. She's my daughter. Knox stood on his porch and watched the taillights disappear down the mountain road. The night was quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. Through the kitchen window, he could see Willa's art supplies still scattered across the table, waiting for her return tomorrow morning. Love isn't enough, he said to the empty darkness. It never was. Judge Rodriguez's courtroom smelled like old wood and disappointment. Knox sat at the plaintiff's table with Rick Clemens, watching his wife and her attorney, a sharp-faced woman from Portland who looked like she charged more per hour than Knox made in a week, arrange their papers with the precision of surgeons. Maureen sat in the gallery behind Lorna, her face set in lines of righteous indignation. She tried to approach Knox in the hallway before the hearing, but Rick had intercepted her with the polite firmness of a man who'd handled too many family court cases to be surprised by anything. Mr. Merritt, Judge Rodriguez began, settling her reading glasses and opening the file. You're seeking emergency custody of your 15-year-old daughter based on allegations of neglect during a hiking incident. Mr. Clemens, please present your case. Rick stood and moved to the center of the courtroom. He was good at this, calm, methodical, letting the facts speak for themselves without unnecessary drama. Your Honor, on the morning of October 15th, the minor child Willa Merritt suffered a displaced tibial fracture during a hiking expedition with her mother and maternal grandmother. Despite obvious signs of serious injury, the child was forced to walk approximately 2 miles on the broken leg while the responsible adults ignored her pleas for medical attention. Rick placed the medical records on the evidence table. Dr. Martinez's report clearly states that the displacement of the fracture was consistent with continued weight-bearing after the initial break. In layman's terms, Your Honor, making this child walk on her broken leg caused additional damage that will require surgical intervention and months of rehabilitation. Knox watched Lorna's face as Rick spoke. She was trying to look composed, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table. Her attorney, Ms. Brennan, according to the nameplate in front of her, was taking notes with sharp, angry strokes. Furthermore, Rick continued, this incident represents a pattern of neglect and emotional unavailability that has characterized Mrs. Merritt's parenting for several years. Mr. Merritt has been the primary caregiver, handling school conferences, medical appointments, and day-to-day parenting responsibilities, while Mrs. Merritt has pursued other interests. Judge Rodriguez looked up from the medical records. Other interests? Mrs. Merritt has been engaged in an extramarital affair for approximately 6 months, Your Honor. During this time, she has diverted family resources to fund romantic getaways while neglecting her daughter's emotional and physical needs. Ms. Brennan stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Merritt's marital difficulties have no bearing on this custody matter. They do when they demonstrate a pattern of putting her own desires ahead of her child's welfare, Rick replied smoothly. The court will find documented evidence of Mrs. Merritt expressing resentment toward her daughter in communications with her romantic partner. Knox had read those messages so many times they were burned into his memory. She's so much like her father, quiet and boring. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't gotten pregnant so young. Judge Rodriguez studied the documents Rick had submitted. I'll allow the evidence as it relates to parental fitness. Ms. Brennan, your response. Lorna's attorney stood and smoothed her skirt, projecting confidence Knox didn't think she felt. Your Honor, what happened to Willa Merritt was a tragic accident, but that's all it was, an accident. Mrs. Merritt and her mother made the best decisions they could with the information available to them at the time. Ms. Brennan moved to stand behind Lorna's chair, one hand resting protectively on her client's shoulder. Mrs. Merritt is a devoted mother who made a difficult judgment call in a stressful situation. To destroy a family over one incident, regardless of how unfortunate, sets a dangerous precedent that would terrorize every parent in this state. Knox felt his jaw clench. One incident. As if 17 years of emotional neglect could be dismissed so easily. Furthermore, Ms. Brennan continued, Mr. Merritt's extreme reaction to this situation, changing locks, freezing assets, filing for emergency custody, suggests someone who is unstable and vindictive rather than protective. Judge Rodriguez looked at Knox over her reading glasses. Mr. Merritt, can you respond to that characterization? Knox stood slowly, aware that every word he spoke could determine his daughter's future. Rick had coached him on this moment: stay calm, stick to facts, don't let emotion override logic. Your Honor, I changed the locks to protect my daughter from people who demonstrated they cannot be trusted with her welfare. I secured our financial assets to ensure Willa's needs would be met regardless of how this case proceeds. And I filed for emergency custody because watching my daughter suffer while her mother checked her phone taught me that some situations require immediate action. He paused, looking directly at Lorna for the first time since entering the courtroom. I'm not vindictive, Your Honor. I'm a father who finally understands that protecting his child means more than keeping the peace. Ms. Brennan tried a different approach. Your Honor, Mrs. Merritt admits that mistakes were made during the hiking incident. She's prepared to undergo parenting classes, family counseling, whatever the court deems necessary to rebuild the relationship with her daughter. The relationship was never built in the first place, Knox said quietly. Judge Rodriguez held up her hand. Mr. Merritt, please let counsel finish. Mrs. Merritt loves her daughter and wants to be part of her life, Ms. Brennan said. Severing that relationship completely would be traumatic for a child who has already suffered enough. From the gallery, Maureen's voice cut through the formal atmosphere like a rusty saw. This is all about money. He's trying to steal our assets. Judge Rodriguez's gavel came down hard. Ma'am, you will remain silent or you will be removed from my courtroom. Ms. Brennan winced. Your Honor, I apologize for the outburst. Mrs. Stilton, Judge Rodriguez said, looking directly at Maureen, I understand you were present during the hiking incident. Maureen stood, apparently unable to resist the opportunity to defend herself. Yes, Your Honor. I've raised 4 children, and I know the difference between a real emergency and teenage dramatics. That girl was perfectly capable of walking. Knox watched Judge Rodriguez's expression change. The judicial neutrality slipped just enough to reveal the mother underneath, a woman who'd probably comforted her own children through scraped knees and broken bones. Mrs. Stilton, you're telling this court that you believed a child with a displaced tibial fracture was being dramatic? Children exaggerate pain to get attention. It's perfectly normal. Did you see the x-rays from the hospital, Mrs. Stilton? Maureen's confidence flickered. Well, no, but then how can you determine what was normal about this situation? Ms. Brennan was on her feet, trying to salvage the damage. Your Honor, Mrs. Stilton is not a party to this custody dispute. No, but she was a caregiver during the incident in question. Her judgment directly impacted the minor child's welfare. Judge Rodriguez's voice was ice cold, and her testimony suggests a troubling lack of empathy for a child in genuine distress. Knox felt the tide turning in his favor, but he kept his expression neutral. In family court, everything could change with a single misstep. Judge Rodriguez reviewed the evidence one more time before rendering her decision. Based on the medical documentation, witness statements, and the pattern of behavior presented to this court, I am granting temporary custody to Mr. Merritt. Mrs. Merritt will be allowed supervised visitation pending a full custody evaluation. Lorna's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, please, she's my daughter. Mrs. Merritt, your daughter required surgery to repair damage that could have been prevented with proper care. Until this court is satisfied that you can prioritize her welfare over your own convenience, supervised visitation is the most contact I'm prepared to allow. Judge Rodriguez turned to Knox. Mr. Merritt, I'm also ordering a home study and psychological evaluation for all parties. This temporary order does not guarantee permanent custody that will depend on the results of the full investigation. Knox nodded. I understand, Your Honor. Mrs. Stilton, Judge Rodriguez continued. You are prohibited from any contact with a minor child pending further review. Your judgment during the hiking incident and your testimony today suggest you pose a risk to the child's emotional and physical welfare. Maureen shot to her feet. You can't do that. I'm her grandmother. I can and I will. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Stilton from the courtroom. As the bailiff moved toward the gallery, Maureen's careful composure shattered completely. This is insane. You're destroying a family over an accident. That man has brainwashed you all. Knox watched his mother-in-law being led from the courtroom, her voice echoing down the hallway, even after the doors closed. Lorna sat frozen at the defendant's table, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Merritt, Judge Rodriguez said gently, you'll be able to see your daughter. But these visits will be supervised until the court is satisfied that you can put her needs first. Knox felt no satisfaction in his wife's tears. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about protection. And for the first time in months, he felt like his daughter was truly safe. The knock on Knox's door came at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the custody hearing. Knox opened it to find a man he'd never seen before, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of desperate look that Knox had learned to recognize in his own mirror during the worst days of his marriage. Are you Knox Merritt? Knox nodded, keeping the door partially closed. Willow was still asleep upstairs, her crutches leaning against the wall by her bed. She'd been having good days, lately smiling more, working on her art, slowly returning to the girl she'd been before the mountain changed everything. I'm James Holt. I think we need to talk. The name hit Knox like a punch. Declan's last name. Knox opened the door wider and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. Whatever this was about, Willa didn't need to hear it. About what? James Holt looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes wrinkled despite their obvious expense. About my wife. About what your wife and my brother did to our families. Knox felt something cold settle in his stomach. Your brother? Declan. He's been sleeping with your wife for months while pretending to help me find a house for my family. James pulled out his phone and showed Knox a photo of a woman and 2 young children at what looked like a school playground. Jennifer found the hotel receipts, the credit card charges. Our lawyer says Declan's been using family money to fund his affair. Knox studied the man's face, seeing his own pain reflected there. How did you find out about me? Someone sent my wife copies of emails between your wife and my brother. Anonymous package, no return address. Jennifer hired a private investigator, and he tracked down your court filings. James laughed bitterly. We filed for divorce yesterday. Declan's going to lose custody of his kids. Knox thought about the emails he'd printed, the evidence that had secured his daughter's safety. He'd sent copies to Rick Clemens and the court, but he hadn't sent anything to anyone named Jennifer Holt. I didn't send your wife anything, Knox said. I know. I think your mother-in-law did. Knox stared at James Holt. Maureen. The postmark was from the hotel where she's staying. My guess is she decided to burn down everyone who threatened her family's reputation. James shook his head. The irony is, she probably thought she was protecting your wife. Instead, she made sure Declan would lose everything too. Knox almost smiled. Maureen's need for control had finally backfired in spectacular fashion. Her attempt to manage the situation had exposed Declan's marriage to the same scrutiny that had destroyed Knox's. I'm sorry about your kids, Knox said. Don't be. They're better off without him. Just like your daughter is better off without. James trailed off, apparently realizing that criticizing Knox's wife wasn't diplomatic. Without her mother, Knox finished. You can say it. It's true. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 men who'd been betrayed by people they trusted, who discovered that protecting their children meant more than preserving their marriages. What happens now? James asked. Knox looked out at the mountains that surrounded Fairbridge, the forest where he'd learned to be a man, where his daughter was learning to be strong. Now we rebuild. Without them. 3 months later, Knox stood in the parking lot of Fairbridge High School, watching Willow walk toward him without crutches for the first time since the accident. Her limp was barely noticeable, would probably disappear completely with time and physical therapy. But the confidence in her stride was new, something that had grown during the weeks when she'd learned that her father would fight for her. "How was the art show?" Knox asked as she climbed into his truck. "Good. Mrs. Peterson thinks I should apply to the summer program at the Art Institute in Portland." Willa buckled her seatbelt and looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "It's expensive, though." Knox started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. "Let me worry about expensive. You worry about being amazing." They drove through downtown Fairbridge in comfortable silence, past the hardware store where Knox bought supplies for his business, past the diner where he and Willa had started eating breakfast every Saturday morning. Small-town life, simple pleasures. The kind of existence Lorna had found suffocating, but Knox understood was actually freedom. His phone buzzed with a text message. Lorna, despite the fact that he'd blocked her number months ago, somehow she kept finding new ways to contact him, new phones or email addresses that weren't covered by the restraining order. "That we should talk." For Willa's sake. Knox deleted the message without reading it to Willa. His daughter had seen her mother twice since the custody hearing, both supervised visits that had ended with Lorna in tears and Willa asking to go home early. The court-appointed therapist said it would take time to rebuild that relationship, if it could be rebuilt at all. Knox wasn't holding his breath. "Dad!" Willa's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Yeah, I finished a new painting. It's the trail where I got hurt." Knox felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel. "How does it make you feel to paint that?" Willa was quiet for a moment, considering her answer with a thoughtfulness that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her before she was even born. "Like I survived something," she said finally. "Like I'm stronger than I thought I was." Knox pulled into their driveway, past the mailbox he'd repainted last weekend, past the flower beds Willa had helped him plant. Home. Real home. Not the pretense they'd maintained for years while his marriage slowly died. "Can I see the painting?" he asked. Willa smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her since before the mountain. "It's hanging in my room. I thought you might want to see it." That night, Knox stood in his daughter's doorway and looked at the canvas she'd mounted on her easel. The trail was there, winding through dark trees toward a bright clearing. But the sky above was clear blue, touched with clouds that looked like promises instead of threats. "It's beautiful," he said. "The trail isn't scary anymore," Willa said, already turning back to her homework. "It's just a place where something bad happened. But I'm not there anymore." Knox kissed the top of his daughter's head and turned off her light. In the hallway, he paused to look at the photo on the wall, him and Willa at her 8th grade graduation, both of them grinning at the camera like they shared a secret. They'd looked happy then, but Knox knew now it had been only partial happiness, the kind you felt when you didn't know what you were missing. Now he knew, and he would never let anyone take it away again. His phone buzzed one more time. Another message from another number he didn't recognize. "That I made mistakes, but I love her. Can't we find a way to work this out?" Knox typed his response carefully, knowing it would be his final word on the subject. "You had 17 years to love her. I won't let you hurt her again." Then he blocked the number and turned off his phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for his daughter to grow and learn and become the remarkable woman he could already see in her steady eyes and quiet strength. But tonight, she was safe. And Knox Merritt had learned that sometimes that was enough.